the One Controller Port podcast, episode 300 and oh my god, I need to scroll up. 354. It's at the bottom of my document here. My name's Benjamin Yoder, and it is almost time for my cat to eat. So in the middle of this podcast, my cat might come up and start meowing at me. So I'll need to take care of that when it happens. We're here to talk about video games, though, not my cat. It is okay. This may be maybe unprecedented episode. I don't know for sure. Maybe we've done this in the past. I can't remember. So we're going to try to talk about 3 video games in whole this week, and have a news section. So the reason why is that I'm a little worried that 2 of these games are not going to have, at least one of them I think might not be the longest segment. I think it is going to be a bit quicker. So we'll see. We're going to shoot for 3, but we'll see what happens. Anyways, so we're going to be covering some news this week. We're going to talk a little bit about some Konami edutainment stuff. Million Arthur is back again. Million Arthur does not die. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then also a little bit about the PlayStation Portal and some stuff that came out about that more recently as well. But we're also going to talk a bit about at least 2 games. We're going to talk about Nintendo has like a tabletop game that I played recently that I was like super into that I really liked. There's also a kids case closed game on the Sega Bina. If you didn't see, I got myself a Sega Bina, and this is the first game I played on it. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. The way I have to look at those games is a bit different because it is a system for toddlers. So we'll get into that when we get there. And then if we have time, if I'm like, this isn't super over, I think we're going to talk about an Alice in Wonderland card game on the 64. I may reserve the right to remove that and wait until next time for that one. So we shall see. But to break this up, because it is going to be a game-dense show, I think we're going to push news back to the middle of the show, basically, and then focus first on a game here up front. And that game is Picture Book Games' The Royal Bluff. Now, as I said, this is a tabletop game for DSiWare that Nintendo published, and is actually developed by Grounding, who is known for, Nintendo G and Sakura Samurai and things like that. But what's really cool about this game is that, I've been playing a handful of different kind of gambling kind of games on consoles and things like that. And one element I wasn't really sure could be done well was the idea of bluffing in a game, right? So the idea that like you're playing a poker game and you know what your hand is, but you have to kind of message to your opponent that your hand is something different, right? And so you guys have this whole back and forth about, trying to get the other player to take actions that will ultimately benefit you better. And this game is almost entirely based around that concept. So basically there are 5 colored chips lines on the board, and each of these lines can go up to 10 chips total. And so the player themselves, there can be up to 4 players, but most of the time, at least in like single player, it's just 2 players. Each player is assigned 2 colors of chips. And what those colors mean is basically your score is based off how low one is and how high that one is. So if you have a color that only has 1 chip by the end of the game and another color that has 9 chips by the end of the game, you get 8 points. But if you have 2 chips that have the same number, or 2 colors that have the same number of chips, they neutralize out and you don't get any points kind of thing. So your opponent is kind of trying to guess at, based off your moves and things like that, what color you have. And because ultimately they kind of want to sabotage you by adding chips or basically minimizing, the space between your 2 chip colors and things like that. And it goes over the course of 10 turns total, and then whoever at the end has the higher score by the end of the 10 turns is the winner. But there's actually like a secondary layer to the scoring system in this game as well that's more built around the bluffing mechanic more directly. And that's basically the ability to call the other player out. So when you're playing, you have a choice at the start of every turn. You can do this twice per game. Is you can basically claim what that other player's color is. And if you get it right, you get bonus points. But if you get it wrong, they get bonus points. So it's all about these mind games that basically have you playing in a way that makes your opponent think you have different colors. And whether that be for the whole game or just for the beginning of the game is kind of up to, your opponent and how likely they are to try to call you out on something earlier on. So you may put points or may put chips on colors that you have no investment in because they have literally no point value to you, but you're basically just trying to bait the other player into trying to call you out and saying that those are your chip colors. Against a real person or 4 other people, if you do 4-player, I'm not really sure how this plays out, honestly, because I never played with another person. But with the computers themselves, each of them have different behaviors, and it seems like they're likely to make certain calls based off certain actions you take. And so if you play them multiple times, you can kind of get a feel for how they interpret your moves, and you can kind of abuse the different moves that would be more likely for them to suggest that you are using a certain color. And some might wait till the very end to really try to claim you on anything. So even though you early on played a bunch of pieces that were trying to confuse them, they might be able to read into the fact that the later part of the game you made a different set of moves that made them that would benefited different colors and things like that. I have to imagine for some people it's really hard to trust that a CPU isn't just kind of like interpreting what you have based off, what the game knows you have. And I think with any game, you have to give, competitive situations against CPUs a little bit of a benefit of the doubt. So, especially in games of chance like this, it can feel like, the odds are stacked against you if your luck goes bad. But ultimately, I think the characters in this game do feel like they have kind of a set logic to them and how they kind of respond to you. And it's kind of easy to keep track of this because the game has this really interesting style where it's basically a bunch of like dapper animals. You're like a dapper guy or lady, depending on who you choose. But there are a bunch of dapper animals in like different suits and things like that. So it's like a giraffe with like a top hat on or whatever, and like little bunny with like a little pocket watch and stuff like that. And they all have a little bit of personality to them and dialogue. So when you're playing against them, it's kind of easy to remember like who you're playing against and keep in mind, exactly the types of actions they're going to take. And I really love this this general look and feel of this game. And they also kind of went the extra mile and added like little voice clips in. So whenever you call out each other's colors, they'll be like, "Oh, blue." And then if you like get it wrong or something, they'll be like, "Oh no." So they're not like these like long bits of dialogue, but they're little fun reactions that happen every time, somebody makes a bet or somebody not makes a bet, but like, somebody tries to call out and they either succeed or fail. There's a lot of like fun little dialogue bits between there. Nothing super deep or anything. There's not a lot going on there. But yeah, there's just a lot of like really interesting strategy to this game overall. And there's kind of also another layer on top of this that I didn't mention earlier, where basically the players can kind of like end a game early by putting 10 chips on one color. And so there's other aspects around the game as well that you can kind of use to get yourself points as well. Because if you're the one who ends the game, you get, a number of points as well. So there's other aspects of this game, but most of them I feel like are built around the bluff aspect of it. And sometimes kind of building the chips to the 10 slot can be you kind of trying to bluff that the game is, in your pocket already, even if it may not necessarily be. I don't know how much that actually impacts the computer player, but I could see, when playing against other players, it could definitely play a role there. But it's really generally a very simple game overall. Once you figure out the rules and go through the tutorial, I think you'll be able to kind of get a grasp of it. Playing against 4 computers at the very least, it does get a little bit more challenging to keep track of who's doing what and who's going to make what claims. And I wasn't really sure, like, I feel like the personality of each of the characters are a little harder to track in a 1v1v1v1 setup, right? But when you're doing like kind of the one-on-one gameplay with the computer, I think it is a really, everything about this game just feels like it's really built around the idea of you trying to figure out the ways these different animals act towards you and making moves to kind of react to that. So it is more about reading them rather than just, finding ways to get the most points normally. So I'm not super familiar with gambling games. Maybe there are a lot of other gambling games that handle this bluffing aspect well, but I really was super impressed by what this game did. And I think it does everything it kind of like sets out to do and really ties every part of this game into this idea of trying to read your opponent for bluffing and things like that. So it's really cool. And being on DSiWare, you can't really get it anymore. So just get it the way you can get it now if you really want to. So anyways, I really like that game. That was really cool. I'm really glad I played that. I want to say why I played it, but it involves somebody's video. They asked me to do something, so I don't want to talk about it too much, so I will leave it at that. But I will probably try to mention it whenever their video comes out, because they wanted some gameplay from me or whatever. So anyways, hello, it's the news segment time. Welcome. Something we do a lot on this show is me being self-critical for a lot of reasons. I think it is generally good for me to show that, like, hey, you don't need to be always right about things, right? I was actually talking to my therapist about it a little bit recently, and he was like, the idea of being confident versus grandiose about your feelings. I don't really know word-wise if that makes a lot of sense, but, being confident can have some level of like uncertainty to it still, and you can kind of like put down things that basically say like, hey, I don't know a lot about this, but I'm pretty confident within the settings of this particular topic that this is the answer. But I'm not saying it's a guarantee, just I'm fairly confident. I have a good feeling and information to back it up generally, versus someone who's grandiose, which is basically like the idea that somebody is always right, and they don't really leave any wiggle room and stuff like that. I don't really know if those words work or exactly, but it's something I was kind of bringing up a little bit with him. Anyways, point being, PlayStation Portal. If you don't remember, this is that game controller accessory that Sony put out. It mostly was built for remote play, so you can play your PS5 remotely and things like that. And at the time, I don't remember how much I talked about it on the podcast, but I definitely felt this way. It was this feeling of like, I don't know who this product is for, because it's a pretty expensive device. I think like $200 or $250, something like that. And it starts creeping up on the price of a Nintendo Switch, right? It starts creeping up on the price of a Steam Deck, right? These platforms that are fully capable on their own of functioning in and out of your house without a network connection and things like that, right? And obviously, to some extent, you're not getting the power of your PS5 behind those games, so it feels a bit different. But there's just this feeling that like, I don't know who this is for, and like my assumption would be they'd put out a stock, and kind of like in the PlayStation Classic fashion, if they overproduced, price cut it, and then like, it'll be gone. But apparently it's done pretty well. Matt Piscatella from NPD mentioned, and let me get the wording on this right because this is important. The PlayStation Portal, I lost it. Where is it? The PlayStation Portal was the best-selling accessory in dollar sales in both May and 2024 year to date. And now there's a lot of qualifiers on there, right? Specifically, best-selling accessory in dollar sales. So it's not the best-selling accessory for the platform, but with how expensive the device is, being $200, $250, each one of these being sold is pretty substantially more expensive. But about 2.5 controllers, like 2 to 2.5 controllers worth of cost. So we can probably assume it's sold at least half as many controllers that sold at that time. I'm not 100% sure on this. Again, I am not Matt Piscatella of NPD. I'm just making these assumptions based off this one tweet he had. And I did look it up later, and I did find that Sony also said that this platform overperformed and exceeded their expectations. And, if you didn't know, there were stock issues with it and things like that. So it's one of those things where, like, I sometimes as consumers, we can read a situation based off our own ideas and value sets of what we think are important to somebody buying games and hardware and things like that. But ultimately, whether Sony intended this or not, there are kind of outside factors that kind of lead to things that you don't understand and can lead to a product like this apparently being successful. And so I talk about like the idea of like professional consumers a lot of times when it comes to people like me talking on the internet, although I don't get paid. So can I be semi-pro? I'm the Sean White of video game commentary. I don't know semi-pro. I don't really know the difference between what semi-pro actually means. But but people online who are like influencers and stuff, or like on video game podcasts and things like that, talking about this stuff. I think a lot of times they will talk very confidently about like, I don't know what Sony's doing with this kind of stuff, right? And like, this seems like a dumb move. And ultimately, ended up in a situation where it did work out for Sony. That doesn't necessarily mean that this thing is like, the next big thing, right? But at the very least, it sounds like it has met Sony's expectations, and I would assume is profitable. overall. I still think, even though it's a qualifier of best-selling accessory in dollar sales, I think that is still incredibly impressive for a device that I felt like was dead in the water. So, I think PSVR 2 is a example of a platform kind of generally seemingly failing. And I just kind of assumed that this would be in that same camp. So anyways, I just thought it was worth bringing up. I think it's just really important to remember. And I think it's worth talking about because I do feel like a lot of these topics, when these things go the way that, we don't expect them to be, it's a little less of a news story than that initial emotional reaction when these things get announced, right? And I don't know how often people are really referencing back to these things. Admittedly, I don't listen to a lot of games podcasts anymore, but I think it's good to just take a moment to step back, look at it and be like, yeah, there's a reason I was wrong here, and making sure we think about why we were wrong, not just being like, eh. And I think, like I said, I think it's just like a set of values that we as consumers think are important for games as a business, which sometimes don't matter, or maybe just aren't exactly what are needed for a product to succeed. So Final Fantasy 14, another great example of a product I didn't necessarily think would succeed. Splatoon, didn't think Splatoon would do super well either. So a lot of situations like that I think is just always worth looking at, bringing up. Now, what game we were all right about seems to be Foam Stars. So, although Foam Stars is still going, I don't think they're at their year anniversary yet, but I think they're getting pretty close. So, looking for that press release. Square Enix, where is it at? Speaking of Square Enix shutting down video games, if you don't remember, Million Arthur was briefly a very lucrative, big franchise for Square Enix. They had about like 5 Million Arthur mobile games or fighting, like games in general kind of going on, a VR game, fighting game, like 2 or 3 different mobile games for Million Arthur. And then all of them kind of just shut down over the course of a year or two. And then the only thing that really was announced for the Million Arthur franchise after that was the NFT games, or NFTs, and then after that, the NFT game. And that has recently shut down in the last year or so as well. So Million Arthur exists right now solely as an NFT brand. No NFT game either, just the NFTs. Well, I was wrong about that, apparently. Apparently, about 2 or 3 months ago, I think, they announced a new Million Arthur game for mobile. However, it has only been announced for China so far. And it seems like it is very much aesthetically feels in line with like a Honkai Star Rail and things like that. It's kind of like higher production value, 3D graphics kind of mobile game. But you have like a team of 5 or whatever, and I think they're like cards that represent the characters. And it looks like kind of like a turn-based RPG kind of thing. They haven't really showed off a lot of it, but aesthetically at least looks very pleasing overall, if not maybe a little indistinct from a lot of other games in that space. But I was looking at a 4Gamer article about it, I think, initially, and I think that article was saying there's no announced release date for Japan. And I don't even know if those original Million Arthur mobile games ever made it to the US. I'm almost certain the NFT one didn't. The fighting game did. That did make it over. I believe the VR game did as well, but is no longer for sale. I think it was only for sale on PSVR in English, and I think, or maybe it's on PC in English, and the PSVR version's Japanese only. There's some weird thing about it. Don't take that for fact or whatever, but there's some weird thing about it. But anyways, Million Arthur lives on. The blood and breath of that game. We'll see if it keeps going, baby. I love that Million Arthur just like keeps cropping back up, but with Square Enix kind of changing their publishing policies and things like that, I really wonder if they'll keep at it. But I think China is just a big market, and I don't know if the previous Million Arthur games had a presence in China. I'd be curious, like, if the Final Fantasy games have had a presence in China in terms of the mobile games and how successful they've been, and how that compares to how Million Arthur did as well at the time. So, anyways. And the last story here isn't really too much of a news story. It's just an interesting article I saw on 4Gamer that is about Momotaro Densetsu's Education Edition. If you don't know, Momotaro Densetsu is, I believe, a Sugoroku kind of game, which is like a Japanese board game. It's something I really got to look into at some point. The Japanese board game scene just seems like something that really needs to be better looked at in general. Maybe somebody out there has done it, but I feel like I haven't seen a lot of like greater understanding of what, you know, the importance of a game, the game of life on like video game consoles or these Momotaro Densetsu games are. You know, keep in mind, Konami was the third best-selling physical software seller of games in Japan on the Switch last year. And I'm going to take a strong guess most of that was Momotaro Densetsu coming out. That's a huge franchise. Anyway, so this elementary school edition, or this education edition, is really kind of a way for elementary school kids to learn about different places in Japan, I believe. I believe this version actually, I might be wrong. I think this version might be the worldwide version of Momotaro Densetsu, so maybe it's like an overall, yeah, this is the worldwide one. So this article is talking about, basically teaching kids about the different flags across different countries and things like that. And they're just kind of talking about, basically the idea of, in some cases, this is like the kids' first experience with video games. There's like a very weird thought to me as somebody who, I guess to me, I feel like video games are ever present. So the idea of like video games being like not in your hands until this moment in time in elementary school is kind of interesting. But yeah, basically they had like these little printouts of different flags, and it seems like each they're basically trying to point out differences in different flags in different regions, and some flags have like, kind of very similar looks, but different like proportions of colors and things like that, or different, tones of colors, all that kind of stuff. So basically it was about that. And it's interesting. The lady in the picture, who is doing this presentation looks like a foreigner to me. I could be wrong. So I'm curious if this is a outside company who's doing this, or if this is like internal Konami project kind of thing. But yeah, and then at the end of the event they had at elementary school, they also give kids free copies of the game, it looks like, as well. So but yeah, they said this is available in like 4,000 different elementary schools. This particular event was based around, I think, one school, but they said 4,000 different schools has them, or I think 7,000 totals. 4,000 of those were elementary schools, I think is what it was. So I'm curious if this is like one of those things that it scales by class range. I didn't finish it, but that Jujutsu Kaisen typing game has different grade levels for typing and things like that as well. So it goes from, I believe, first grade all the way up to 12th grade or whatever the Japanese final grade is for school kind of thing. So it's interesting. I do think if I do make a video about Konami, I might want to touch on these like little events as well. And also that indie event I did, not necessarily to be like, hey, look, Konami's doing something good, because I think every company has these kind of, goodwill kind of things they do, for tax purposes, and also just, general public sentiment purposes. And, in this case, indoctrinating children to be Momotaro Densetsu fans the rest of their life. No. I think there's always incentives behind these things. But I think it'd be kind of cool to be able to show people this kind of thing if I were to make a video that like was talking about Konami in the modern day, and what that means, compared to the history that people compare Konami to all the time. I do want to make that video, but we'll get into some scripted video stuff here. How about right now? It's Ko-fi time. Drink that cup of coffee that you have in your pocket, pull it out, sip it up. That's how coffee works, right? Demodori supported us again for this month. Thank you again, Demodori, for the support in the month of July and August. I appreciate that. So far, when it comes to exclusive content on the Ko-fi, nothing new is posted at this moment. However, I think I might go ahead and post a script I've been working on regarding the Nintendo video. Again, years ago, I was making an Animal Crossing video that has evolved into this Nintendo video. So I think I'll put that together so you guys could look at that if you want. That will be only for people who are supporters, though. If you have supported in the past and you're like, I'm curious about it, let me know. I'll find a way to get it to you. Because there have definitely been months where I have had nothing available for you to look at. So I'm happy to retroactively, provide you anything. Also, the Phantasy Star Online video is in there as well right now. That video I think is going to go up at the end of September or early October, I think is the time frame for that. It will be after my Pot Gaming video for September, that's for sure. So anyways, so that is coming up. So I'm hoping that Nintendo video will be done sooner rather than later. It's not that long of a video. I think when I put it to like a script to speech generator thing, it said it would be about 10 minutes. So, but I do think there's going to be a lot of just space to fill in that video. And a lot of times when I don't have a very clear like vision of what kind of visuals are going to be on screen at any given moment, it can be either good or bad, because either it doesn't matter and I can just throw whatever on screen at the time, or it does matter and I have to spend a bunch of time trying to find something that represents what I'm saying on screen because I don't have any idea of what I want to show to like keep people involved. That is not necessarily something that needs to be done. You know, I was watching a video recently. I forget what the topic was, but the video was like completely unrelated. It was like someone had like Lords of the Rings on screen when they were talking about something completely different. I have no idea what it was. Strange stuff like that, man. Like sometimes I get really caught up about what's on screen and then I go watch somebody else's video. I'm just like, I'm putting way too much effort in because they're so much more successful than me. And then also, or maybe like they have reached so many more people yet at the same time, don't even bother with these things that I really try to put a lot of effort into. So that doesn't mean I won't put effort into it. It just means that I probably should deprioritize just how important it is to make sure every element on screen means something at every point. But we'll see. Anyways, other than that, though, when it comes to actual content, if you did not see it, my Arc-Rise Fantasia video is out. So that is my podcast highlight. So I talked about it on the podcast before. I basically edited that down into like a 15-minute review of Arc-Rise Fantasia. So go check that out. Starts a little slow, I will say. So just give it some time because I kind of ramble on a little bit at the start. If you didn't see the Sega Bina and Love and Berry and Hunex pickups video, it's a really weird pickups video. If you just want to see some weird stuff, my pickups video I put out recently, you should check that out. A lot of weird stuff in that video. And then also this week, by the day you're hearing this, I think probably in the afternoon, the PCFX fan club episode, Sparkling Feather game discussion thing is going to be up. So if you want to hear me talk about Sparkling Feather after like 4 to 5 years of wanting to talk about it, the gates have finally been unleashed. The beast is unleashed. Sparkling Feather has flooded into the territory. So anyways, so that is should be up. If not at this moment, you're listening to this later today on the day this is going up. And then also next week is a Hot Pot Gaming episode where I talk to Princess Pokey. If you don't remember, I talked to Princess Pokey. I think at the time she was called Pokey Puff years ago. We talked about games for girls. This time we're talking about Bratz and Barbie games. I was really excited to do this show, and I'm very happy with the final product of what came out. So I know the games for girls stuff is not necessarily up everybody's alley here, but at the same time, or maybe I shouldn't say I know that, but I get the impression. A lot of people I think come to me for obscure Japanese games and then they get stuff that is like not necessarily that. And I just hope that you're on board with it. But I think fan translations and stuff definitely played a role in the early views I got for Hot Pot Gaming and stuff. But yeah, I think it's really exciting to talk about, what Barbie and Bratz games mean to people who, are into games for girls, especially, growing up with games for girls and what that was for them. What the values of those games were, what made them exciting and things like that. So we talk about that. Other than just like general stuff about like Style Savvy Fashion Dreamer in the context of Style Savvy. We talk a little bit about that stuff too. Those Hot Pot Gaming episodes, the more and more I do them, the more I'm just kind of like, I don't know, this is an interesting conversation, not necessarily related to the topic, but leave it in because, I don't know, it's kind of cool. It's kind of a fun discussion. So yeah, and that's kind of the stuff coming up here. So look forward to all that. And yeah, I'll update you guys next time once we're on the other side of that Hot Pot Gaming stuff on what's coming up next. We're going to talk about a very different video game this time. As I mentioned, I got myself a Sega Bina, so words are coming out of my mouth. Case closed. The Mystery of Numbers and Shapes. I believe that's the translation. I think I machine translated it, and I think Case Closed is the official translation. This is my translation of the title. But, Detective Conan anime series, long-running anime series. But I got this game recently for the Sega Bina, and if you don't know, the Sega Bina is essentially a Sega Pico. It's called the Advanced Pico is its alternative name, and so it's very much a system for toddlers. So, these are video games aimed at very young children, and, they leverage a variety of anime licenses. In this case, it's Case Closed or Detective Conan, basically. And it is important to note that when you play these games, there's not necessarily a formal progression to them. They are book-based video games that you basically flip the pages, and those take you to different set pieces and things like that. So this game in particular basically focuses on a variety of math recognition and kind of like spot the difference kind of puzzles. And so each page you're on basically launches about 3 to 4 different mini games that have you solve different puzzles and things like that. They're super easy generally, and the hardest part about this is not knowing Japanese, because I don't necessarily know the instructions for some of these, but once you figure it out, you can generally figure out that it's like, hey, this is about counting certain numbers of things or counting certain objects or identifying certain shapes and colors and objects and words, again, very like toddler kind of Blue's Clues kind of stuff, on as a game. So your expectations for what this game is, I think, have to be very much confined to that thing. And, as an adult man, I can solve these problems easy enough once I actually know what they are. So there's kind of 2 major aspects of this game. The second one's a little kind of straightforward. So I want to start with the first one, which is the game structure. So as I mentioned, this is a book, and you are flipping between the pages. And because of that, you can flip to the final page basically at any point. And so what that means is there's really no real winning aspect to this game. So it in some way is back to more traditional media, right? I mean, you can open the final page of any book in your life and read it and be like, that's the end, right? But that's not really how it's meant to be consumed. It is something that is meant to be followed page by page. But maybe a little bit more wiggle room, because, a kid could maybe turn the page however they want, right? And so you're going through each of these pages. They show you different set pieces. The kids are basically solving different, mysteries around different areas like theme parks, or they're like in a library on a school computer. And all these mini games are basically based around these different set pieces. And you can kind of click the different characters, and they'll have different voice lines and have a little bit of flavor dialogue and things like that. But what this game does is when you get to the final page of the book, there is a final series of puzzles that are basically referencing all the past puzzles that you have done, and then timing you. So it almost feels like this test at the end, where you're kind of being tested to like, how good of a detective are you? I don't know if that's how they present it, but kind of what it feels like, where it's like you're going to do like 10 or 15 mini games, and each of these are going to be on a timer. So you need to be able to solve these problems quickly. And you also can't mess up generally as well, or else you'll fail that challenge kind of thing. And I think you have to pass. I think it's like maybe, I don't know the number for sure, but I'm going to guess probably the majority of the puzzles for them to be like, cool, you did it. Awesome. Congratulations, 3-year-old kid. kind of thing. But I think it's kind of interesting that, because there is no structure to this game, there is, despite there being no structure to this game, there is this like very climactic feeling that happens, that if you follow the book page by page, you get to this final test, and it does feel like you are kind of tackling this challenge in a way that is like, all of this is kind of building up to this point, even if it's not necessarily, presented as that per se. I don't know if it's like in the game presenting as like we're back at home base solving the puzzle or whatever, or if it's just like, hey, I don't know, we're hanging around, do a bunch of these puzzles or something like that. There's not really a mystery here, I will say, or at least on paper. There is like, I think the final page, there is a police car on it. So I don't know, maybe there is some epiphany they come to. But, I don't understand Japanese enough to really be able to understand what's being said verbally. And most of the machine translated stuff with like the camera used for like the actual dialogue and things like that. So I think that's like kind of interesting to look at and think about. Some of this I think applies to the Sega Bina as a whole, but seeing games kind of built around this concept and how they kind of, still recognize the fact that there probably should be this kind of like final element that is like a satisfying final test to this game, despite, you as the player having full control over where you go at what point. Remember, I'm going to bring this up and I'm not going to edit this out. Remember the Alone in the Dark game with a DVD menu on the Wii 360 and PS3? Ben, I'm not letting you edit this out. I'm just saying that that's there. Reminding people has nothing to do with this. Anyways, I'm not editing it out, Ben. I'm gonna commit a crime against you if you do it. Commit crimes against myself. Anyways, back on topic. But the Sega Bina, I'm not really sure of the hardware capabilities. I believe the original Sega Pico was like very much like a Sega Genesis in terms of like what it was capable of. This is a system released in like the early 2000s, and I think it went on to like the early 2010s. And, it's definitely limited hardware. It's all 2D assets and things like that. And I would say generally it feels like it is probably in line what a 2D game on maybe like the Sega Saturn would look like. I don't know what hardware's inside and what its capabilities truly are. But, it is visually, I think, a very nice looking game overall. These are very well done pieces of pixel art of all these Detective Conan characters. And, a lot of this art is reflective of the pages in the book. So there's these kind of large set pieces with high quality art, things like that. The Bina is running over like composite cables and things like that. And the audio for sure is really grungy in a way that, like, it's understandable. Don't get me wrong, but, it definitely feels like a system that is not capable of like full CD audio or something like that. But, these are tiny cartridges, like basically embedded in books as well. So there's not a lot of physical space, and I have no idea how much like, actual storage space there is on them as well. But, as somebody who has not played a Bina, I wasn't really sure what to expect, but I think visually it all comes together very well, and it's fun to look at. And I think if you are like a curious Detective Conan fan, it's at least like maybe just flipping through, some visuals of what's in there and just seeing how the game looks. But, it's definitely a game made for toddlers. But I was just really impressed by, I think, by the fact that it did recognize that the need for some kind of end challenge, despite there being no real structure and format. Again, it may be a Sega Bina thing in general that I'm just like, is standard process, but just thought I'd bring that up. So anyways, that is Detective Conan. I don't know. It's hard to say, like, with something like that is like not a traditional video game. Literally, there are pages of that game. I think every page on that game just has numbers, and you just press it, and the Detective Conan characters just count from 1 to 10. I mean, literally, that's the kind of stuff it is. So it's like, how do you evaluate this as an adult is kind of a challenge, and I don't want to just sit there and be like, this isn't a video game. Well, guess what, Ben? You bought a system that isn't meant for normal gamers. So I think it's pretty reasonable for me to, like, take a step back and say, what is this thing doing? Like, I think that's important. Speaking of which, I think we got time for our final topic here. Speaking of a game that I think you really need to think about what it's doing. 64 Trump Collection. I think it's like Waku Waku Alice Snow Wonderland or something like that. I don't remember the exact full name. Look at the title. If I'm clipping this out for a review later, look at the title. But this is a cutesy Alice in Wonderland card game on the Nintendo 64. And one thing that's kind of distinct about it is that it uses entirely almost 2D assets, which is, not very common on the Nintendo 64. And it creates this almost like Paper Mario kind of aesthetic to it. And it's a very fun package overall. And it has, well, I'm sure nothing, super like out of this world, a story that it uses to kind of like string together all of its different card games and stuff. And so I think it's a really fun package that, gives you a story reason to try a variety of different card games, or at least kind of interact with them. I know I haven't played a ton of card games in my life, so a lot of these experiences are generally new to me, even if, they are time-honored card games that people have been playing for, I'm sure, hundreds or thousands of years. So, but yeah, being based in the Alice in Wonderworld land, it definitely follows that story. I will be honest with you, I don't actually really know the Alice in Wonderland story, but, Alice seems to chase a rabbit down a tree hole or something and ends up in this world where she, is faced with a variety of challenges, and maybe the most iconic one of them, right, is her drinking something that shrinks her down, basically. Most of what I know about Alice in Wonderland comes from Kingdom Hearts or whatever, right? So, but, it's all these little set pieces that I'm guessing are based off the fairy tale folklore thing. I just don't know how accurate it is. And all of it's done in this very like super cute Paper Mario kind of look to it. And, Alice is this little girl like with a sprite that kind of bounces around, and she's like really energetic. And, every time she goes around, she's like kind of conveying these problems she has to people. And it's all paired with like very simple dialogue. And it all has like these very light jokes that even when using like machine translation to kind of translate it, you can kind of catch on to, what's happening here. If the king is saying the same line over and over and over again, it's kind of like delivered for comedic effect and things like that. And it has all this very like children's book kind of kids anime kind of humor and feel to it, like a Doraemon or something like that. I say that not having watched Doraemon, so I don't know why I'm using that as an example. But every problem in this world is solved by playing card games. And so it leans into that humor a bit where, like, you know, by the end of the game, Alice is like, yes, I know. The only way we can solve this problem is I beat you at a card game kind of thing, right? So it's definitely self-aware in that kind of thing. So it's a variety of card games. I don't want to give the full list here, but, you know, it's got like Old Maid, something called like Page One. I don't really even know what that is. And Speed. I've played a little bit of Speed before and things like that. So kind of these classical, you know, card games based around, you know, the traditional, I don't know what you'd call them, face set of like, you know, hearts, clovers, you know, 1 through 10, king, queens, jack, and things like that. There's not many customized cards in this. It is very traditional cards based. I don't really think there's any like specialized rules to these or anything. You know, each of these games are different and they might have different rule sets. But, you know, I think they're nothing, anything specific to this game. So really what you're coming into here is for the presentation. And so each of these characters that you meet in this story are your competitors in these games, and they have little character portraits in the game, and they make little facial expressions and have these little vocalizations that happen, you know, when they lose or win. And there's also like really weird, like specialized animations that come out of nowhere. Like one stage just has like a submarine come out and like launch missiles at you when you get knocked out of the game. And it's like weirdly elaborate for what it is. But, you know, the game itself is all very straightforward. And so it's all about like glamorizing it up. There's basically total of it like 8 chapters as a whole. And so while it's not a very long game, I think it'll probably take you you probably could do it in less than an hour if you beat every game the first time, every time. You know, elements of luck play into these games as well. So, you know, you're going to lose sometimes, and sometimes that's going to be because you don't understand the rules. It's all in Japanese, so I had to kind of like figure out what was happening because I didn't necessarily know the rule sets for all these games. But, you know, I think by the end of it, you know, 1 to 2 hours is a pretty reasonable length of time to be playing this. And so beating each of these are awarded with, you know, these little cutscenes as these characters, you know, kind of play around in these cutscenes and have these little quips between each other. And ultimately the ending has, you know, this credit sequence with this like really nice kind of, I don't know, hand-drawn art is the right way to put it, but, you know, it is like these 2D portraits that are really detailed. And kind of celebrate all the characters that you met along the way. And it has a lot of like this kind of like ragtime kind of soundtrack to it with a lot of like pianos with like this very like, you know, upbeat kind of sound to it. You know, if you ever seen like an old timey like 1920s stage play kind of thing, that's kind of the soundtrack here. And it all fits very well. And I think the big thing is that the general package of the story mode of this just all works really well together, and the presentation just is really consistent throughout. And so I think if you're into this kind of like more cutesy anime Alice in Wonderworld aesthetic, you'll be really happy with how this game looks and plays out. There are some pretty massive frame rate issues here, which is really weird because the game doesn't seem like it should have that. But, you know, at the end of the day, none of it really matters in the context of what this game is, other than just if you personally don't like frame rate issues and things like that. I was able to overlook it without like any problem. One additional thing to this game that's actually kind of interesting as well is that once you finish the story, or actually you can do it before you finish the story as well, there's this separate mode where you can just play these games kind of without the story element to it. And the ones that come from the main story does maintain the presentation of those. But then there's like solitaire games as well. And these have completely different aesthetics where it's like astrology based for some reason. And then there's also like blackjack and I think poker, and those just like have slot machine aesthetics, like digital slot machine aesthetics for some reason. And so it's like this really weird clash of looks, but you know, this is all just kind of like the side stuff where it's just like, hey, if you just want to plop this game in and play some random gambling games, here you go, kind of thing. And there's also like some fortune telling games and things like that are a little bit more in the style of the game itself, with like this really big sprite for Alice as like these little night cards dance around as you pick your fortune and stuff. But, you know, a lot of these are just, you know, either fairly shallow experiences with like the fortune telling thing, or in the case of the other gambling games, you know, they are what they are, right? If you want a card game on the 64, you know, I think that side mode perfectly fits everything you need in that regard. But, you know, from today's perspective, you know, where you have all these kind of card games at the fingertips on your phone or on whatever device you're using, right? Maybe needing a Nintendo 64 to provide these to you is not necessarily as important, but I think that just highlights even more how important that the presentation is what really matters with this game. And so if you want to have this like narrative based game that is taking you around these different card games and stuff, and just presenting them in like fun and exciting ways, and just having these little cutesy dialogue interactions between all these different characters. I think this game does a really great job of achieving that, and that seems to be kind of the main focus of this game. So, may not rival the likes of like an Ocarina of Time or Mario 64 on the system, but I think it does a really good job with what it set out to achieve in creating this kind of holistic story-based world around Alice in Wonderland and playing cards. So anyways, I was really excited to sit down and enjoy that game. I was like, I don't know if like the way I was looking at it was painted a little bit by the fact I saw somebody call it the worst Nintendo 64 game of all time. And I played it and I was just like, man, this is just a card game. Like it is so inoffensive. And like, if anything, it's more than that. It has this like very exciting presentation, I think. And like cutesy presentation that I think just does a really good job. And so I think a lot of times people's expectations just are so beyond it to the point that like, I don't know what this game looks like if you wanted it to succeed, right? Like if you look at what this game and what it was trying to do, other than improving the frame rate, like what else would you want out of it? I don't even know. And like, I didn't even really want to, this is the thing I'm running into. We talked about me being a judgy little boy a handful of weeks back. And it's just like, to some extent, I should go engage with whatever they're doing and try to get their thoughts and opinions on it. But at the same time, just like, how often do I need to do that? And like, I only have so much time in my life. And should I be focusing on like how they receive the game? I think the answer is I just need to shut up and not talk about it in general, even if I see it, and not think about it, rather than only starting with the thumbnail of something. I don't think it was a YouTube video. I think it was maybe like a Twitter thread or something. And just like not engaging with it, but then also acting as if I engaged with it and like being very critical of it. I think that is the thing, is like, if I'm not going to engage with it, then just don't talk about it. Anyways, so I was very happy with it overall. I was really happy with all these games this week, honestly. Like, I think I was really impressed by what Picture Book Games The Royal Bluff did. Despite it being very limited, I think Case Closed, The Mystery of Numbers and Shapes did something that really surprised me. And I think Trump Collection 64 Trump Collection, just like I think all these games are games that work if you come in being like, okay, what is this game trying to do? And then if you recognize what the game is trying to do, I think it's a lot easier to appreciate it than if I come in being like, okay, is this as good as Mario 64? It's just like, what are we doing? I don't know. Anyways, either way, enjoy all those games, maybe. I'm guessing nobody will play these. I forget if I brought it up on the podcast, but somebody recently mentioned to you, like, hey, your channel is kind of like a retro game recommendation channel. And I'm like, I don't think that's what this is. I think this is I thought this was cool, and I expect none of you to play it. So Arc Rise Fantasia, I think, was really an exception, where I was just like, hey, if you like JRPGs, you should probably play this game. If you like Wii JRPGs, you should probably play this game, right? I think it is a game that really is a very cool game to even just the average game player, where a lot of these, like I said, you kind of need the right expectation of what's happening here. Maybe that's the difference, is like these games, I know all of them need a specific mindset for you to come in and be like, oh, that's cool, versus Arc Rise Fantasia. I think you just kind of come in and just be like, hey, I'm looking for a JRPG. I'm like, awesome, cool. Is Arc Rise Fantasia the best one ever? No, but it's a very good one. So yeah. Anyways, that's it for this week. I'm glad I waited, because I tried to record this podcast yesterday, and I don't know what was wrong with me, but I just could not talk. So I'm glad I slept on it and woke up, and this went a lot smoother, although I did have like a lot of little gaps and stuff that I'm going to have to edit out, and hopefully you won't notice them. So my cat did not come and ask me for food, but often if I stop talking, that is my cat's signal to come out and like look at me and be like, what's up? So once I stop talking on this podcast, I may immediately feed this cat. So anyways, that's it for this week. Thanks for coming. OneControlWorld.com is the website. Again, check out that Arkwright's Fantasia review if you haven't. The Sega Bina Love and Berry pickups video, Unix stuff in there as well. A lot of really interesting stuff in there, so I highly recommend checking that out. The PCFX Fan Club, Sparkling Feather, go check that out. That's a really interesting and weird game. That's one of those games where, like, I don't know if normal people would like it, but I liked it, and trying to understand why I like it is a challenge. And then keep an eye out for the Princess Pokey, Barbie and Bratz podcast. I guess this whole week is basically just like, hey, make sure you come in with the right expectations and all these things. Like, come in expecting to learn what Barbie and Bratz games are and why they're important to people who are into it. Don't come in expecting why Barbie and Bratz games are as good as Doom 2016. So, is that right? Doom 2016? Was that the year that came out? Hey, look, I said earlier that I didn't know anything about marketing your video games, but God, it would make me so much happier if you just like gave your video game subtitles rather than me have to say Doom 2016. Anyways, that's it. Thanks for coming. I hope you guys have a great week. OneControlWorld.com is the website. Check it out. Check out my Ko-fi. Hey, if you want to support me, that'd be cool too. Goodbye.